This is the school food waste and composting training. Let's dive in with Corey, the compost worm.
One of the driving missions for the craft school is education. They have a rigid bin, 2 different tumblers, the free bin system, as well as their garden waste. So what Phil does basically is he just comes in with a tractor and turns his pile upside down to let it sit for another year. So this is really passive composting, right? Some of the differences between sort of actively managed compost system and a passive system. At some point, you guys can come up and kind of dig in, but you can see in a year, I mean, this turns into this, right? It's cool. This is going to be used next year. Over here, they have a green manure pile. This is actually goat manure and bedding that will get mixed. So when Phil turns this pile, he'll mix these two together into a pile to sit for a year. And then that's the ready-to-use compost that gardeners will put on their garden beds. So that's all from the garden waste. In this system, I was talking to Phil earlier today, and they're estimating they have 18 or 20 households that are associated with the garden who are bringing their food scraps now to this system. They use this hot frog, which is a rigid tumbler, rigid plastic tumbler system, 2 compartments, so you'll be able to come up and see it, as well as this Jora tumbler, which is an insulated tumbler, so you'll be able to get to see the differences between those 2 models. They use these for the food scraps primarily to break them down, so they do that initial decomposition. It gets hot really quick. Once it turns, it doesn't take but maybe a week or 2, and then the food scraps are really no longer recognizable, except maybe some eggshell or an avocado pit. And then once it's gotten to that point, they put it in this first bin and mix more carbon with it. So they have primarily leaves that different gardeners will bring in or that they'll get from the community, maybe a little bit of a manure. And they mix it in this first bin, and then they move it when they need to the next bin, and then that's ready to go on the garden as well. And so you'll be able to come up and actually get your hands dirty if you want. They do in this system use the bio bag compostable kitchen caddy bags. They're pretty insistent on that for their system. You can see what those are. We don't get any money from BioBag, and there may be other companies out there, but I can tell you that BioBag will break down in a cold compost system. It's one of the few that will really consistently break down, even in a totally static pile. If you don't undo the knots take a little bit longer. But if you think about that, right, it's harder to actually get into where that material is tightly knotted together to break down. But they will break down over time. And just a word of caution, and part of why I'm calling out the company name for that is that there are lookalikes. And even the packaging is very similar. They mimic the fully compostable biodegradable bags. And so just buyer beware. If you're looking for a compostable kitchen caddy bag, just make sure that you're really looking at it and you understand that it doesn't say just that it says compostable or degradable, biodegradable, some will say, but that doesn't mean that it's going to actually break down. Some of those products do break down only in hot composting, so you just really want to know, because the last thing you want to be doing is taking out what looks like plastic from a finished compost, right? And we have had documented issues with that in Vermont. For hot composting, you want it to be at least 120. 131 is the point at which you kill weed seeds and any other pathogens. It's a little less concerning if you're just doing vegetable waste, garden scraps. But if you're going to put any meat in, you want to be hitting those higher temperatures. These tumblers will get hot compost. I've seen temperatures 150, 160 in the tumblers. I've also worked with a co-housing site that put a whole chicken in the Jora tumbler that had died, and it was gone in less than a week, basically. They also in here, just because it is kept dry, they have their log book. And so you guys can take a look at this as well. Phil put a clean sheet for us if we add today. This is a great communication tool. They don't necessarily have to make sure that they've connected with each other to know what's going on. So this arrow bin, you can come and take a look in as well. There's not much in here. It's very dry and not doing much. So this is a good example of more like a backyard system maybe, or a cold system. You'll see this arrow bin has like sort of the center of a top loading washing machine in it, like this cone sort of thing. The advertisement is that this acts as to like draw the air up into it, and it's going to make compost faster. I don't really see it happening. You can make up your own mind. But basically, you can achieve the same thing by putting some corn stalks or sunflower stalks or something like sticks sort of in your bin a little bit to create more structure so it doesn't get as compacted. It helps a little bit with aeration. That's basically what this is doing. This is a very tall bin, but you can take this whole top section off. At this site, they have this like hand crank auger thing that they use to actually mix the material there when they're using this more. All right.
But would they put water in that?
This should be watered, yeah. Now it's fine, right? In a cold static system, they could just leave this here. It'll freeze over the winter. It'll add more food scraps on it. It will decompose. It'll just take a lot longer. This just slides. And one group that called me was using a larger version of the hot frog. This is a hot frog tumbler. And raccoons had figured out how to slide it and get into it. But so I had this long phone call troubleshooting with them. When I went to look at it, they had kind of forgotten that carbon is an important part of the recipe. So they had a really nice, smelly compost mix, food scrap mix in here. So we corrected that in their recipe. The raccoons had learned, right? So what they ended up having to do was actually drill holes and put a latch on it. Because the raccoons were like, well, we can't smell it, but it was there yesterday. So just something to keep in mind when you're choosing a system, if it's important for it to be animal-proof. That, again, management. We talked about that a little bit with bears, but all animals, right? So making sure that it's not super stinky and that you're actually adding carbon is very important. But then as well, animals could figure out sliding this. This is much more difficult, and you can adjust the tension on it. So you guys can take turns coming up here. If you want to take temperatures, they just built this hot frog to like full, so they couldn't put in another thing on Wednesday. So pay attention to how much it's decomposed, how much the volume has gone down since just this past Wednesday. You can take the temperature if you want. They're not going to be adding anything else into this season because this garden site closes down. So once this is ready, they're going to be putting it into this bin here and mixing it either with some of the goat manure, maybe some leaves, and let it sit there to continue composting. You can also take a look into all of these chambers. This one has stuff in it. Looking pretty good, but it has a little ways to go. There's definitely some bags and stuff in it. This one's empty that we can add to today. There are calculators out there online that you can download and you can put in, you know, I'm using this much horse manure, I'm using this much, you know, volume of food scrap, and it will help you calculate that out. A lot of community compost and school sites have different recipes that they try depending on what materials they're using. The general rule of thumb, if you're using a diversity of carbon sources, like animal bedding, dried leaves, wood shavings, all mixed together, is that 2 or 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. In the tumblers, if you're exclusively using the wood shavings, it can be 1-to-1 or a little less than 1-to-1. So even though we're going to put a whole big bucket in, we're probably only going to put 3 scoops of carbon in. Of the, yeah, here, let's pull out the scoop. Used to be the old coffee can, right? Now it's a yogurt scoop. But that'll depend a little bit in how what I tell people to do is also to pay attention to the moisture. So I can tomatoes, and I tend to have a lot more sort of tomato slop when I'm doing that. I'll add more carbon if I'm adding a bunch of really wet, sort of sloppy stuff to my compost. So, but if you're at a school site and you're adding a lot of bread or pastas or stereotyping here, I don't know what you guys feed your kids, then you're going to want to vary it a little bit. But diversity is great in all things, but in compost systems as well. And so what they do, because they really want to use the tumblers for that initial breakdown of food scraps, when they move the material from the tumbler into this bin, they add other sources of carbon as well. And that just makes it a richer, more microbially complex and diverse product in the end. So what we suggest is that you take some kitchen shears, or I just actually I have like a little claw tool, and you actually cut open, like as you're adding it, just cut open the bag so it spills out a little bit more, and that'll just speed the decomposition. It will break down, but it'll take longer because you have to actually wait for the bag to break down before the carbon and all the microbes can get to the inner stuff. All right. So now it's fine to put paper in a compost system. I wouldn't necessarily recommend putting in a whole thing with sheets that's just going to get wet and create sort of a pocket of potentially anaerobic conditions. It doesn't have to be perfect. I know some people like put everything through a paper shredder. Sure, I mean that's fine, but this is fine too. And you don't want to put it in necessarily like all in a stack. So, I kind of like ripped it up and put it in pieces. Here's another one. Yeah, it looks like some people will actually line their kitchen caddies with newspaper to help absorb some of that, keep your kitchen caddy a little less wet. That's fine too. Yeah, and that's okay because that's already wet. little bit bigger, but it doesn't really matter. This is a broccoli stem. That's gonna take a while. And actually, could you hand me my hatchet, which is leaning right there? I'm gonna go ahead and just chop this up for them. So this is woodier, right? More cellulose. It's not like that nice whole but sloppy, already rotten tomato that we just saw. This will take quite a bit longer to decompose. So I'm going to take the safety off my hatchet. This is my traveling hatchet. And I'm going to use this stump over here and just chop it up into little smaller chunks and toss that in. I think they prepped this, right? So I'd have good pieces to show you that. And here, I don't know if you could see, on the very bottom, that got squashed by the other bags. Oh, some stuff. There we go. Is a bag with a bunch of water. So this one we're just going to dump in with all that extra goodness.
So that's good. That's goodness.
Sure. So that is called, some people call it contact water, some people call it leachate. It's basically just food juice. Wouldn't recommend drinking it. It's great for the microbes. If you have a lot of it, you're going to think about that when you're deciding how much carbon to add. Right? If you add a lot of extra fluid like that, you might want a little extra carbon of these wood shavings to just help absorb that. You're looking for that carbon to nitrogen ratio. You're also looking for that optimum range of moisture. So you're trying to get all these different factors to put together like a puzzle. And so if you would like to add carbon, or someone else can come add carbon either way. Well, we have a whole nother pail we could add first if you'd like.
Would you add that much before you added carbon or not?
This is a large tumbler, but it's probably good. I would probably add 2 to 3 of those and then add the next one, just to help with the mixing. Let's do one more of those, and then we'll add the next bucket. This is just wood shavings. It's like guinea pig bedding or rabbit bedding. Yeah.
Where do you get it?
You can get that at any hardware store, I think, or certainly a farm and garden store. Some people kind of balk at buying carbon. For the tumblers, you get so much benefit from it that I think it's worth it. And you can buy, that there is probably $10 worth. It's pretty cheap. The drawer tumblers in their instructions actually suggest using wood pellets. That works too, but they're a lot more expensive. Now, if you have a ready, free source, you can also, I know some sites or some schools that also have wood shop. As long as it's not like lacquered wood or, like stains, different stuff in it. Wood shavings. I'm less fond of using the stuff that comes off from chainsawing wood unless it's an electric chainsaw, just because you do get those gas fumes in it. They will break down. That's just a personal preference of mine to not want to add sort of gasoline fume carbon to my system. But if it was the only carbon I had, I'd add it. So they have 20, about 20 households contributing to this right here.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some different size places. A lot of the sites I work with have a tumbler 3-bin system more than the rigid bins. But you can certainly do it.
They have what?
A tumbler and then like the 3 pallet bins or the wooden bins that are larger, a bit larger. So I'm trying to make the translation of volume in my head, but you could certainly use it in the smaller, like you can process food scraps to the point where you would be comfortable putting it into a black bin with a little bit more leaves or bigger wood chips on the bottom, some layering kind of. You can move food scraps through there, empty the one side and then the other, one chamber and then the other chamber like once a week usually. Like you can move volume through that tumbler for that initial breakdown period. When things are decomposing, you often will get a little bit of spike in heat as that decomposition happens, especially in a tumbler where the more rapid decomposition happens. Then it cools down again. If you mix that up and add maybe a little bit more carbon or sort of adjust the moisture, sort of make it more optimal, you'll get another little spike in heat and then it'll go down again. Compost is done, it's cured basically when you can move it and you aerate it and it doesn't heat up again.
Okay.
It's considered stable. You can also do an easy test that backyard and community composters do is you put a little handful in like a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag or something, and close it for 2 or 3 days. Open it, and if it smells like ammonia at all, there's likely nitrogen that hasn't fully decomposed, right? So you want it to smell like nice and earthy. So you can't, there are tests you can do too that are like $30 or something, but really what you want is to have it be nice, stable soil like a rich soil when it's done. The other good way that a lot of, especially in combination with gardens, what they do is do a little seedling, like a seed germination test to see if you get the germination or if it's still what they call hot compost, not meaning temperature hot, but nitrogen hot. It'll kill the seed. So if that nitrogen isn't fully broken down. What will happen if you have too much carbon and you put it in your garden too early is that it actually causes denitrification. So those microbes have carbon, but they don't have nitrogen. They're going to go out and look for that nitrogen and use it up. And your plants won't have access to it because those microbes are going to be like, I had to break this carbon down, I need nitrogen, right? And then the other is true for if you have nitrogen but not enough carbon. And so you want to have it good and stable. If you're going to be moving it from the tumbler to the bin, I go not so much more, you're expecting that there's going to be another decomposition stage in the bin. You're really looking in the tumbler to get it to the point where it won't be very interesting to animals. So I characterize that by not having recognizable food scraps. So you might have eggshells, those take longer. You might have some corn husks, avocado pits, things like that are going to take longer. But you shouldn't be able to be like, yep, that's a whole tomato. That's a watermelon chunk. So once it's sort of mixed up and it's starting to look like it's clearly not done, right? It's not that nice soil consistency. You're not, you can smell it. I smell compost all the time, right? Like, ooh, okay, that's not ready. Or that doesn't smell like anything. I can visually tell that it's not fully broken down, but it's not going to be an attractant to animals. It also helps people get over the ick factor a little bit. That's an issue in terms of you can put your nasty food scraps in and close the latch in it, and then the next time you open it, it's not so gross looking.